Today, 3 Sydney-based A-League players, including the captain of Macarthur FC, arrested over an alleged betting scheme.
We will allege that those players intentionally gave out yellow cards.
Also ahead, the opposition leader outlines cuts to permanent migration as the solution to the housing crisis in his budget reply. A second police officer killed and hundreds of arrests as riots continue in New Caledonia. And Australia's new Paralympic uniforms unveiled at Fashion Week in Sydney. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Lorna Dunkley. 3 senior A-League footballers have been arrested over an alleged betting corruption scandal. Police allege a senior player was taking instructions from a man believed to be offshore in South America to organise yellow cards during certain games in exchange for payment. For more on this, our reporter Xanthi Gregory joins us now from Sydney. Xanthi, what have the police said about this alleged betting scheme?
Yes, so we've just heard from police this morning. Now, they executed 5 search warrants across Sydney this morning and have arrested 3 men. One of those men is the captain of the Macarthur FC club, Ulysses de Villa, a 33-year-old man. Now, he's been arrested over allegations that he engaged in conduct that corrupted the outcome of two games played last year, one in November and one in December, and also over failed attempts to manipulate the outcomes of games this year in April and May. Now, he is being held at a Mascot police station in Sydney, expected to be charged this morning. All players are expected to be released on bail later this morning. Now, police allege that the captain was receiving instruction from a man believed to be from South America to manipulate the number of yellow cards that were handed out during games. Police allege that the captain offered 2 junior players $10,000 to engage in this conduct, and they have been charged. So another 27-year-old man has been is expected to be charged later this morning, and a 32-year-old man is also expected to be charged and released on bail later this morning. So essentially, police are warning anyone engaging in potential corrupt conduct that could alter the outcome of an event, that they have their eyes on them and that they should essentially learn a lesson from this. We heard from police a little earlier.
All sports fans understand that even one penalty can change the way a game flows and also the way the momentum of that game can be carried out. We will allege that the giving out of 4 yellow cards and the subsequent penalties that arose out of those yellow cards could in fact change the way that result of that game went.
Now, police also allege that it resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars being paid out as a result. They didn't tell us why the captain essentially had contact with this criminal group in South America, and those details are expected to come out further down the track. All men who've been charged are expected to be released on bail later today.
Xanthi Gregory, thank you very much. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by ABC Grandstand's Ned Hall. Hi there, Ned. What sort of, these are just allegations at the moment, what sort of reputational damage can it potentially do?
An awful lot. It's a terrible timing as well for the A-Leagues. They've got their semi-finals this weekend, both of which have sold out. Macarthur FC not involved at this stage of the season. But the fact that there is some evidence of manipulation of events happening in matches, that is a real concern for it. If you look around, I had a quick search around earlier on a betting app earlier just to see if you look at the A-League semi-finals, there's over 75 markets that you can bet on within that. English Premier League matches, over 150 potential markets, and around 200 per NRL match and 160 in the AFL. So there are so many separate markets away from the actual result of actual matches that people can put bets on. And this is where sport, not just football, all sports have become more susceptible for betting irregularities in their contests.
What sort of checks and balances are in place to try and stop any misdemeanours?
Well, Sports Integrity Australia obviously play a big role in this country as well. And I think there's an education aspect to it as well, to talk to players about these things. But I think, as we just saw in the press conference before from the police in New South Wales, the high-level police operations now are keeping a very close eye on betting markets. And a lot of betting markets, you can see when there is any irregularities, and there's a lot more money going in on certain areas that you wouldn't expect. For instance, it should be fairly noticeable if there's a larger amount of money being put on the number of bookings in a particular match. And these sort of irregularities and manipulation should be able to be picked up through the betting markets. But as we're hearing as well, that there's an overseas component to this. It really does involve an international cooperation now between police and sort of authorities around the world to try and keep on top of this, because it's not an Australian thing. It's not based in any one particular country. It's a global issue these days. You can bet on sports in all sorts of countries. And so where this arises from, it's very hard to keep track of.
And Ned, what sort of guidelines and regulations does the FA have around players in these circumstances?
Well, betting on matches is taboo for football, but also most sports as well. You cannot bet on the sports that you are participating in, and there's fairly heavy penalties to be handed out for players who do. We've seen in the English Premier League, Tonali, the Newcastle United player, is facing a very lengthy ban there for betting. And Ivan Toney, an England international, who's just come back from a long suspension for Brentford for betting on matches that he was involved in. So the guidelines are fairly clear. There shouldn't be any sort of difficulty there for players to understand at all. You don't have bets involved in matches that you're involved with, but also having any connection with people who are involved in betting gear is also a no-no as well. And I think in the past there've been a number of players who've been caught up in this, who basically it ends their careers. I think that's a key thing to look at here as well. A lot of the time it can literally end your career if you are caught up in any of these betting scandals.
In terms, as I say, these are just allegations, so we're not going to talk about this specific case. But in terms of matches being driven in a certain way by sports people, how high up in the past have they gone in terms of the level of the game?
Well, probably the most notable one is the spot fixing scandal with the Pakistani cricketers back in 2010, where 3 players actually served jail time. And that was related to the number of wides bowled in a match. So again, it's often not the outcome of matches themselves that are being manipulated. It's events within the matches that are far more easily manipulated than the overall result of the match. In that, Salman Butt, who was the captain of the Pakistan side at the time, he got a 10-year ban from the game, served 30 months in prison as well. Mohammed Asif and Mohammed Amir had 7- and 5-year bans respectively. So, yeah, that's elite test cricket, and it's got to that level as well. We've also seen spot fixing issues within cricket in the IPL. That's been a problem in there in the past too. But I think 10, 11 years ago as well in the NRL, there was an issue there as well with the player Ryan Tandy, who was also caught in a separate issue with spot fixing. So I think the number of markets that are available for all sports now mean that all sports are open to this sort of manipulation by people who stand to make a lot of money from it if they know that they're getting a particular result out of a game.
Ned Hall from ABC Grandstand, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
In other news today, Australia's permanent migration intake would be cut under a plan by the opposition leader to address the housing crisis. Peter Dutton insists that reducing who can live here is one way to ensure more properties are available. The Treasurer has described his budget in reply speech as unhinged and nasty. Political reporter Stephanie Boris joins us now from Parliament House. Steph, hi there. Peter Dutton's outlined his policies then to address the housing crisis. Perhaps you can run us through those.
Well, one thing all politicians do agree on is the fact that there is a housing crisis here in Australia, whether that's someone looking for a rental property or someone trying to buy a property. But where the debate really heats up is exactly just how to fix this problem. And the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has pointed the finger at migration. He used his budget in reply speech last night to outline what the coalition would do if it won government. One of the plans is to cut the permanent migration intake by 25% for 2 years. Putting that into figures for you, that would be from 185,000 people down to 140,000 people. And we're talking here about people that are on family visas, they're on humanitarian visas, so that's the refugee intake, and also permanent skilled visas. They're the people that the Australian government determines need to come to Australia to help fill positions where there aren't simply enough skilled Aussies to do those jobs. For example, at the moment, it's in areas such as construction for building homes and also nursing too. Aside from that policy, Mr Dutton announced that there would be a cap on foreign students studying at Australian universities under a coalition government, which is very similar to what the Labor government has announced as well. And finally, the other policy announced was that for 2 years, foreign investors would be banned from actually purchasing existing homes. They could purchase a new home, but not existing homes. The question is exactly how many, homes would be freed up as a result of that policy, of that 2-year policy to ban foreign investors. Mr Dutton wasn't able to put his own figure on it, but did point to a government figure suggesting over the past 2 years, 5,000 properties have been bought by foreign investors. So amongst all of these policies announced last night, there were no plans as such on how to build new homes. Mr Dutton today saying that migration first has to be the priority.
We're in a very difficult situation and nobody can pretend to you that the homes can be built overnight. So if that's the scenario, Australians need homes now. You can't build homes now in the numbers that you need. What can you do? Well, the obvious question is to look at the migration program, and that's exactly what we've done. It's measured, it's a tough decision, but it's a necessary one to help Australians achieve their dream of home ownership.
So, Steph, what's the government said?
The government's plan to fix the housing crisis is very different to what the opposition has put forward. They are planning to build 1.2 million new homes over the next 5 years, and that's, of course, with the help of states and territories. A recent report, though, suggested that target may be pretty hard to hit, given that we've got a lack of construction workers, there's problems with getting building materials in, and, of course, there's slow processes and there's been delays with buildings being approved by state, territory and local governments. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers, though, has been heavily critical of what the opposition has put forward, saying that the focus and the blame shouldn't be placed on migrants.
This unhinged and risky rant that we saw from Peter Dutton was long on nasty negativity and short of economic credibility. And one of the reasons for that is because he has left key questions unanswered about his changes to the migration system. He has not been able to say, for example, what the impacts on Australian industry will be. Industries like construction, agriculture, what the impact on our economy would be.
Well, finally, aside from housing, what other policies did Mr Dutton outline last night?
On the health front, Mr Dutton reaffirmed that the coalition would, if it won government, increase the number of Medicare subsidised psychologist visits from 10 to 20. Regarding domestic violence, while there was no promise for additional funding to what the government has announced, Mr Dutton focused on the criminal aspect, saying that he wanted to make it a Commonwealth offence for anyone that was using a mobile phone to stalk or harass. And finally, on energy, that's another big talking point across Australia. People are struggling, of course, with energy bills, and there are questions about our energy sources going forward. Mr Dutton is still very keen to push ahead with nuclear energy, putting nuclear into part of the energy mix. But for now, we still have no details about the timing of that process, where nuclear reactors would be placed, or the cost.
Steph, thank you. Up to 100 protesters have refused to end their occupation of a building at Melbourne University for a second night. Classes have been cancelled and tensions between protesters and university staff continue to rise. The university has not requested police assistance to end the demonstration yet, but has warned it may take disciplinary action against those involved. Protesters say they are calling on the university to cut ties with Israeli-linked companies and weapons manufacturers. Similar occupations have been staged at other university campuses in Melbourne and the rest of the country. More than 200 people have been arrested from the riots in the French overseas territory of New Caledonia. 5 people have died in the unrest, with France declaring a state of emergency in the territory. The French government has sent reinforcements to New Caledonia, with the number of police on the island to rise by 1,000. Asia Pacific's Lithe Mavono says the violence is the worst the country has seen in decades.
Does not look good now, with several nights of clashes continuing. The latest news that we've had out of our sources in Nouméa is that a third French police officer, 5th person in total, to have lost their lives over these clashes. We're getting conflicting reports out of Nouméa that for some, last night was the calmest in what has been the most violent in 40 years of difficulties between French authorities and the indigenous leaders of New Caledonia. However, we're seeing some efforts on the part of the French government to temper or diffuse the situation with it. It looks like there is some moves to suspend this controversial reform bill that has been the cause of these latest rounds of violence in New Caledonia.
South Africa has urged the International Court of Justice to order Israel to stop its Rafah offensive. Lawyers for South Africa claim the actions threaten the survival of all Palestinians in Gaza. Israel says the allegations are unfounded.
Back before the UN's highest court, South Africa makes yet another appeal for judicial intervention in Gaza. Its lawyers told the International Court of Justice the situation in the Palestinian territory has reached a new and horrific stage after Israel launched an attack on the city of Rafah last week.
Still mounting evidence of Israel's genocidal intent.
South Africa is calling on the ICJ to order Israel to cease hostilities in the city and allow UN officials, journalists and investigators to enter. It claims Rafah is the last refuge for Palestinians in Gaza and needs to be protected.
It was Rafah that brought South Africa to the court, but it is all Palestinians as a national, ethnical and racial group who need the protection from genocide that the court can order.
This latest request for emergency provisional measures is part of an ongoing case South Africa has brought against Israel under the UN's Genocide Convention. It alleges Israel's military offensive in Gaza, which was launched in response to the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7, amounts to genocide.
What we're asking for is the court to use its powers to stop this carnage. The court to use its powers in an unambiguous way to stop this.
Israel insists it's acting within international law and has strenuously denied allegations of genocide. Lawyers for Israel will have the opportunity to respond to South Africa's latest request for intervention on the second and final day of arguments.
Have been killed.
Any orders made by the ICJ are technically binding for signatories of the Genocide Convention like Israel, but are unlikely to be enforced. Michelle Rimmer, ABC News.
Slovakia's Prime Minister remains in intensive care after narrowly surviving an assassination attempt. The shooter's been charged over the attack that sent shockwaves across the country and laid bare a fractured political climate that's fueling violent attacks on politicians across Europe. And a warning, this story shows the moment of the shooting.
Police guard the hospital entrance. Inside, the Prime Minister utters a few words. He's lucky to be alive.
The situation is now still very critical. And in front of the Prime Minister are now really very difficult hours and days.
More is emerging about his would-be assassin. Just last month, the 71-year-old was pictured at an anti-government rally. A minister has described him as a lone wolf, his neighbour shocked at what's unfolded.
He was a polite man and wasn't strong about politics as such, but he did feel that some of the measures of the government weren't correct.
In the capital, Cabinet convened for an extraordinary security meeting. The media singled out over the attack.
The reasons why it was a politically motivated assassination attempt are, as the suspect himself said, the media information he had at his disposal.
It's a familiar playbook from Fitzo's Populist Party, which is attempting to replace the public broadcaster. Investigative reporter Peter Sabo is among the journalists fearful of what's to come.
The people who are reading the hoaxes, disinformation, and are vulnerable to these things are like the easy prey for the votes.
It's not only the media under attack. Robert Fitzo's been dismantling anti-corruption powers too, something Xenia Makarova has spent years fighting.
Unfortunately expecting something like this because we have previous experiences with such politically or conspiracy-motivated attacks.
The shooting comes in a tense political environment, solidifying concerns that divisions across Europe are deepening and fuelling violence against politicians just weeks out from the European elections. In Germany, there have been more than 20 physical assaults on politicians this year alone. After yesterday's attack on Robert Fico, Poland's Prime Minister revealed he's received his own death threats. The outgoing and incoming presidents, once political rivals, now side by side, appealing for calm. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Bratislava.
The country's oldest court has marked its bicentenary with a ceremonial sitting in Sydney. Top legal minds, faith leaders and politicians reflected on the milestones of the last 200 years for the Supreme Court of New South Wales. In an interview with the ABC, the current Chief Justice has spoken of the biggest challenges for the judiciary in the future, including artificial intelligence. Court reporter Jamie McKinnell is in the studio with me to talk about it. Hi, Jamie. Why is this anniversary so significant?
Hey, well, this is the Supreme Court's anniversary in New South Wales. Now, this is one of the oldest continuous common law courts in the world, so it has a lot of history, over 200 years. It was established on this day in 1824, and that is really part of what this ceremonial sitting was reflecting on. We heard from a lot of different speakers about the cases that have come through the court through those 200 years, and often how they reflect societal changes as well. So, for example, Chief Justice Andrew Bell was reflecting on areas of law like women's rights, custody, some huge changes to do with powered machinery and the arrival of cars, even to do with personal injury, industrial accidents, and more recently, he said, cases to do with historic institutional sexual abuse. So looking at through the court's history as a lens for societal changes is quite an interesting element to this. Now, there have been things that haven't changed. Justice Bell has said, for example, the court has a constant role as a guardian of the rule of law. It also serves as a check on excessive government power. And it's also had an emphasis and an acknowledgement continuously of the importance of open justice and the freedom of the press. Now, to mark the bicentenary, the court has released a 400-page history book which goes into all of this detail. And they've also set up a permanent gallery on a level of the Supreme Court building in Sydney's CBD. But in his interview with the ABC, Chief Justice Bell has reflected on and how the court's work affects the people who come there to resolve their various disputes.
My philosophy or my view is that courts are involved in a very human process. For any litigant, the case is often of huge significance to them personally or their families. It might affect a question of liberty, property, it might affect their children, it might affect their financial position, etc. There's great human drama, as you know, in the courts, and part of the role of judges is to resolve those disputes fairly and systematically, but also sensitively.
Interesting to hear from him, isn't it? I mentioned before artificial intelligence he sees as something that will play a role in what they do there. What are his concerns?
Well, the concern mainly is around generative AI, so programs like ChatGPT. Now, earlier this year, it was actually the first time that a different court in Australia, the ACT Supreme Court, encountered this problem with something potentially like ChatGPT. There was a criminal case down there where the court came across a character reference in this case, and the language suggested that it might have been generated by a program like ChatGPT. And in that instance, the court decided to pay lesser attention, put little weight on that material. So these are the kind of questions that AI is throwing up in a legal perspective. What does the court do with material like that, and how does it pick whether something is a genuine document or genuine material, or has it been computer generated? Now, the court is increasingly likely to be challenged by these type of questions, but Chief Justice Bell has told me in this interview that in some ways it's not entirely a new problem for the courts.
One obvious issue is what are called deep fakes. Now, we've always had forgery in the courts. There's always, courts have over hundreds of years had to deal with examples of forged evidence, forged signatures, fabricated documents. But the power of AI, including not just documents but mimicking voices, etc., presents huge opportunities for fraud or attempted fraud. So we need to be vigilant about that. But there are a number of other issues. For example, expert reports in complex matters. AI offers the ability to interrogate vast databases of material and to generate reports, generate answers. But of course, the courts need to understand the reasoning behind conclusions, etc. And that's a matter which we need to be conscious of and careful about.
Now, Chief Justice Bell in this interview also said that it's not all bad here. It's important that we don't take a hostile attitude automatically to the potential of AI, because there are certainly some positive applications. For example, in a research perspective, as a research tool, it could be very useful, but it does raise a lot of largely philosophical questions about how do we deal with this. Legal practitioners might be using it already, even law students. There was a question in there about how do we make sure that when we're testing law students that they understand the legal principles that they're studying, rather than just knowing how to put a prompt into an AI computer program. So these are the kind of really complex questions that Chief Justice Bell has spoken about in his interview, and it's pretty fascinating to hear that this is probably increasingly going to be an issue that the court will have to confront.
Jamie, thank you for that. Online prescription service MediSecure has shut down its website and confirmed the personal and health information of individuals has been affected after a large-scale ransomware attack targeted the company. The company says it has taken immediate steps to mitigate any potential impact on its systems and believes the attack originated from a third-party vendor. It is yet to reveal how many Australians have had their personal and health information compromised. National Cybersecurity Coordinator Lieutenant General Michelle McGuinness says those impacted will be notified.
It is a significant data breach. At this stage, I know that this can be concerning for Australians. We've convened a number of stakeholders, both using the National Coordination Mechanism and other coordination mechanisms, to bring together all stakeholders in the health community across the government, that is state and territories as well as federal, and we're monitoring closely. If Australians are impacted, then they will be notified. We're working closely with MediSecure to ensure that they are notified and that we are prepared and best postured to respond and support anyone whose information has been breached. We do know that it's a ransomware, and we do not recommend that anyone pays ransom. That just builds a cycle with the criminals. It provides financing for further ransoms, and there is no guarantee that we get the data back or that the data isn't on-sold or shared anyway. Right now, we don't need anyone to take any action. They'll be notified if their information has been released, and the actions that we're taking across government through my office is really to ensure that we can build our resilience and rapidly respond to reduce harm and minimise risk. this stage, we believe it's an isolated incident and that no other entities are impacted. But there are things that every Australian can do, whether you're an individual or a corporate entity. They are on our Act Now Stay Secure campaign or cyber.gov.au, really updating your software, applying multi-factor authentication and ensuring you have unique complex passphrases on all of your accounts. These are things that will lift our cybersecurity posture as a nation and make us more secure. And the other side of that is ensuring that we are resilient, and then when issues like this happen, we convene across government to ensure that we are rapidly ready to respond, including organisations that support re-credentialing Australians.
OK, I want to tell you what happened in Sydney this morning. Ferry services in the city were stopped. They are returning to normal now, though. Heavy fog was affecting the city for a very long period. It looked quite spectacular, but it caused major delays across the ferry network. It descended through the harbour, most of the inner Sydney earlier on this morning. By 7 a.m, Transport New South Wales was forced to halt ferry services, waiting for the visibility to improve. Iconic landmarks, as you can see, including the Harbour Bridge, the Opera House as well, were shrouded by the low-lying cloud. But I can tell you, it's all clear out there now. You're watching ABC News. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and also on ABC iView. Right now, let's bring you the top stories on ABC News. 3 senior A-League footballers, including the captain of Macarthur FC, have been arrested over an alleged betting corruption scandal. Police allege a senior player was taking instructions from a man believed to be offshore in South America to organise yellow cards during certain games in exchange for payment. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has delivered his budget reply, promising to help solve the housing crisis by slashing immigration and international student numbers if he is elected. He plans to implement a 2-year ban on foreign investors and temporary residents purchasing existing properties in Australia. Law and order, nuclear energy and public service job cuts were also on the Liberal Party's agenda. More than 200 people have been arrested following riots in New Caledonia. At least 5 people have died due to the unrest there, with France declaring a state of emergency. The French government has sent almost 1,000 police to its overseas territory. And the Australian Paralympic team uniform for the Paris Games has been unveiled at Australian Fashion Week in Sydney. The Outback look, complete with an akubra and a hopeful gold trimming, also has unique accessibility features for the first time. Police are investigating the abduction of a young mother and her 6-month-old baby in Melbourne's south last week. The mother involved has described the incident in detail, telling reporters it was so traumatic she hasn't left the house since it happened. Reporter Jessie Thompson joins us now to tell us more. Hi Jessie, what happened?
Hi Lorna. Well, police have just released full details really of what they say was a traumatic and protracted incident that they're now investigating with their full might. This began in a shopping centre car park in Melbourne South in the suburb of Rowville at about 6 p.m. last Friday afternoon. It was there that a young mother had just pulled up to do some grocery shopping with her 6-month-old daughter in the back seat. Police say she was then approached by a knife-wielding stranger who demanded she get back in the car and then forced her to essentially drive to 2 separate electronics stores in Melbourne South, where they say he made her get out and buy about 4 Apple laptops, which had a value of about $2,000 to $3,000 each. From there, he then made her drive him to a park in Dandenong, where he finally fled, and the young mother was able to go to a nearby store and ask for some assistance. Now, at a press conference just moments ago, the mother gave up and essentially gave a blow-by-blow interview of what unfolded. It was really harrowing. I can only describe it as being hard to watch. She said that as she was driving, she was so overcome with nerves and so physically sick that at one point she had to pull over and ask that her attacker drive the car. As she was going into the store, she said she had to beg him to not drive off with her baby. And then she said it became obvious to staff in the stores that something was wrong, but she felt she couldn't say anything to them. Another harrowing part of this tale is that the woman's husband and her father also cottoned on to the fact that something was amiss due to the movements of her iPhone and began calling her. Her husband actually managed to track them down, but apparently the woman involved could only say that he's got a knife before getting back into the car and driving on. This young mother who gave the interview said that her attacker actually apologised afterwards and said sorry for ruining your night, but she's told reporters that the effects of what unfolded are likely to stay with her for much longer than just one night.
I think he obviously felt bad about it by the end, and I feel like he must still feel bad. I hope he feels bad, because I don't think he realised the impact it's had on my life. He apologised for ruining my night, but it's definitely had longer lasting effects. And I don't think he realised that it would impact me this badly. I think in his mind that it was just a one and done, but for me it's turned my life upside down for now, and it won't forever. I know that, but for now it's just a lot to handle.
It's that young mother, Kieran, as we're referring to her, describing what happened there in really harrowing testimony given to reporters this morning. Now, her attacker was captured on dashcam footage as he fled from the vehicle, and police have released an image of that person. They say that he is a man of Asian appearance, aged between 20 to 35 years old, and at the time he was wearing a high-vis jacket, a grey hoodie and a dark face covering. Anyone who was in the shopping centre car park, the Stud Park shopping centre, at about 6 p.m. last Friday night, who may have dashcam footage of this person, is urged to contact police. Lorna.
Jessie, thank you. Let's get more now on the opposition leader's budget reply last night. Peter Dutton saying that he'd make significant cuts to permanent migration to help ease pressure on housing. Let's talk about this with Trent Wiltshire, Programme Director of Migration and Labour Markets at the Grattan Institute. Hi there, Trent. Something like a 25% reduction in annual permanent immigration rate is what Peter Dutton is talking about. Where will he get the reduction?
Good afternoon. So Mr Dutton is focused on reducing the permanent skilled intake, and it looks like it's mainly coming from skilled visa holders. So we think this policy proposal will have a pretty much a very small impact on rent, which is the aim of the proposal, but it could be very costly in the long term, because we know skilled migrants that come here offer a large economic dividend. They come here, they're young, educated, pay taxes for a long time, add to productivity growth as well, in the short term field skill shortages. So cutting back on skilled migration has a big long-term impact, but reducing the permanent intake doesn't really have much of an impact in the short term on net overseas migration.
OK, he was saying that should he become Prime Minister and this gets implemented, it will be a short-term fix and could release, I think his words were 40,000 additional homes in the first year, 100,000 homes over 5 years. You don't see it like that, though?
It seems ambitious. So the migration system, the numbers of people here, so net overseas migration, is driven by people on temporary visas rather than the permanent intake. So most people that get a permanent visa are actually already in Australia. So cutting back the permanent intake, which Mr Dutton has proposed, won't do much in terms of the number of people coming here in the immediate term or staying. So that's really driven by temporary visa holders, and most of that is driven by the number of international students here. So that's a really large cohort of people. It's risen dramatically over the last couple of years. Of people have returned post-COVID. That's a good news story. But there's no doubt that is putting pressure on rents. The more people here does put pressure on the rental market. We estimate about every 100,000 people here pushes up rents by about 1%.
OK, that's interesting. It's an age-old debate. It's been had for many years here in Australia. Discuss immigrants create jobs and economic growth. What's the current thinking?
Oh, absolutely. Australia's migration program is heavily tilted towards skilled migration. As mentioned, they provide a really big benefit in terms of the extra taxes they pay. the crucial roles they fill. And there's growing evidence that skilled migrants in particular can boost productivity growth. We know that's really been a major problem for Australia's economy in recent times. So cutting back on skilled migration over the long term really will have a really significant negative economic impact. So we estimate that every 10,000 fewer permanent skilled migrants in Australia cost the budget about $2.5 billion. That's that narrow impact. The broader impact on the economy is even more significant. So I think the proposal from Mr. Dutton is to reduce the skilled intake significantly over the next couple of years, but then bring it back up, but still keep it lower than what is being proposed under the current government, which is 185,000 places for 2024-25.
One of the focuses of Jim Chalmers, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and Peter Dutton touched on it as well, is student visas, reducing the number of students that are encouraged to come to Australia.
That's, as I mentioned, that's really the key driver of the numbers of net overseas migrants at the moment. So the international education sector, is a massive success story for Australia. But there are some problems with it, and the current government is addressing some of those in terms of cracking down on sort of the dodgier colleges that there are problems with in terms of exploiting students coming here primarily to work rather than to study. So proposals include higher English language requirement, more savings required to come here, a new genuine student test for people that are coming here to study, and that will probably mean it's harder for people to get a visa. And I think overall these proposals would mean a smaller but better international education sector. We've actually proposed that student visa fees should rise significantly. So we propose they should rise from about $700 up to $2,500. That will raise about $1 billion a year, and that could be used to fund a further boost to Commonwealth rent assistance, which is one of the best measures that we can help struggling renters in the current rental crisis. So, building more homes is certainly the long-term solution to our housing problems, but in the short term, that won't do much. We need to do things more immediate, and I think boosting rent assistance further is a key policy.
Trent Wiltshire from the Grattan Institute, thanks for unpicking it all with us.
Thanks very much.
Turning to the finance news now, Sam Yang is with me here in the studio. Hi, Sam. Star Entertainment, what have you got to tell us about them?
Well, so the casino operator says its license suspension for Gold Coast and Brisbane casinos will be extended. That's according to a notice issued by the regulator, the Queensland Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. It says it has changed the date from May 2024 to December 2024. The extension essentially will give regulators more time to assess the outcomes of the second Bell inquiry into the Star in New South Wales, and to better assess the Star's remediation progress before making further decisions, Lorna.
OK, new data out today that could affect renters.
Yeah, that's right. So the data from PropTrack, which is a private analytics company, shows that renters may enjoy some relief because more properties are being listed in the market. So today's data shows that the number of vacant rental properties increased in April, rising to 1.21% nationally. So that's a good sign, but that rate is still less than half the level that's considered healthy for the country's rental stock. And of course, we know that rents are still edging higher, so it is an ongoing battle for many renters find themselves in.
How are the markets looking today, Sam?
Well, the Australian share market is still tracking lower in afternoon trade. That's after Wall Street's major indices closed lower on Thursday. Let's take a look at the numbers now. The All Ords and the ASX 200 index are down around 0.5% each, with the financial and healthcare sectors weighing on the market. If we take a look at the movers now, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank is the standout. Its shares went up by 4.3%. After a trading update, its cash profit for the 10 months to the end of April was down 2.3% to $464 million. Shares of BHP rose by 0.9% after a rally in iron ore prices. On the way down, property funds manager Charter Hall is losing substantial ground. Star Entertainment, as I mentioned, is also down on license suspension. Turning across the region now, where the NZ50 is down around 0.2% at the moment, as the country's inflation eased a little in the March quarter. Nikkei is in the red, Hang Seng is trading higher, while Shanghai is fairly flat. Now over to the US. Wall Street closed lower on Thursday after the Dow briefly reached to an intraday high of 40,000 points for the first time. The Dow Jones Index down 0.1%, the S&P 500 also down by around 0.2%, and the Nasdaq Composite lost 0.3%. On to commodity markets now. Spot gold prices are on the way up, so are the crude oil prices. And finally, the Australian dollar is a little weaker against the greenback. It's buying around 66.6 US cents. And that's finance, Lorna.
Thanks, Sam. 5 people have died and more than 200 people have been arrested during riots in the French Pacific territory of New Caledonia. A state of emergency is in place for the Pacific island, with authorities calling in reinforcements from France. Tonya Scholes is one of many Australians stranded in New Caledonia. She says there's been no clear plan from Australian authorities on how she and other Australians will make it home to Australia.
We tried the 24-hour emergency line, or first of all, we tried the New Caledonia Australian Embassy. It is closed. It is in the middle of town and where the majority of the conflict is happening, so I can understand that. Our call was routed through to Canberra, and they took our email address and our names and our passport details, and then we've heard nothing.
Gosh.
And that's been a little worrying. So we called them again about 3 o'clock in the morning here, and the 24-hour number, and we found that we had more information than they did, and we've had nothing. And I would have really hoped and liked even just a check-in email. Are you okay? What's happening? Is anyone injured? You know, it would just make us feel less alone to know that the Australian government knows we're here and kind of cares. But we haven't heard anything, no.
Tonya, do you have a plan to get out?
We have a little hire car, and today is packing day. Our flight is due to leave tomorrow. We are waiting to hear from our host if the airport is open and if the road has been cleared by the Army so that we can actually get to the airport. Even after what we've witnessed this morning, that is going to be a very scary trip for us. But we're just going to go. Even if we can only get one ticket at a time for a flight where there's 4 of us, we'll just go as soon as we can and get to the airport and sleep there and stay there until all 4 of us are out. But we still have our fingers and toes crossed that tomorrow we'll be on our flight at 4 in the afternoon and arriving back into Brisbane in time for dinner and back into the arms of my amazing fiancé. So yeah. Miss him. Yeah.
Tonya, you sound very level-headed. So much for your pre-wedding girls' holiday. Are you coping?
I am. The girls are amazing. Like, we have Sam is our chef extraordinaire. Like, what she can't do with a coconut is just not worth knowing about. She's literally knocked coconuts down and cracked them open. And so with the little amount that we have, she's been able to keep our spirits up with feeding us. And we've got Christine and Jenny from Tasmania, who are friends from way back. And we're playing games and we're just chatting and I think we're all just trying to boost each other. About an hour ago, I had a bit of a meltdown, but after seeing what we saw this morning was quite confronting for me. I've travelled the world. I've never seen what I've seen here.
Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, has reportedly come under fire by Russian missiles. Fighting has intensified after Russia launched a major ground assault into the northeast region last week. The Kharkiv governor has reported at least 5 Russian drone strikes, warning the city remained at risk. Ukraine's ambassador to Australia says international support is critical at this time.
We're holding the ground. However, the situation is quite difficult. What's important now is to maintain the unity of our international coalition of countries who are supporting us. Because, of course, when you run out of ammunition on the battlefield, this is when you get in trouble.
Well, to take us through the latest in the conflict in Ukraine, as well as recent material changes in the Gaza war, we're joined by our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons. Hi there, John. Let's talk about Ukraine first. It does appear that Russia has the momentum at the moment, doesn't it?
That's right, Lorna. It's clear now that Russia's begun its summer offensive. The Ukrainians knew something was being planned. They knew that Russia was planning a counterattack or a summer offensive. They didn't really know where. It's a very long front line. It's about 1,200 kilometres, which is huge. They didn't quite know where, but it's happened now. Clearly, the Russians are trying from the northeast of Ukraine, Kharkiv, the second largest city, which is important for them industrially. It's a major manufacturing centre. It's also been one of the university centres of Europe. And the Russians, it appears, have taken now several villages around Kharkiv. The Ukrainians, it's clear that it's serious by what the Ukrainians are doing. They've evacuated, according to their own admissions, about 8,000 people from the area, several towns, and it looks like the Russians now want to encircle Kharkiv and take it. Now, if the Russians were to take Kharkiv, that would be a major strategic and morale failure for the Ukrainians. I don't think they will, because I think what the Ukrainians are doing is rushing reinforcements from the south along near the Donbass up to try to stave off the Russians. But that, of course, means there'll be vulnerabilities further down. The bottom line is the Ukrainians don't have enough ammunition to be fighting this war. The Americans are frantically trying to get more to them. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said we are rushing ammunition to Ukraine. There's a sense of panic developing, which I haven't seen in the last 2.5 years. So I think things are ominous. I don't think that it means that Ukraine will lose the war, but I think it's factual to say at the moment they are losing the war.
Yeah, OK. So where forward? As you say, Ukraine is struggling with the munitions that it has, and does it also not have the people?
It's having trouble with the people. There's been so many dead people. The enthusiasm of 2 or 3 years ago, I went there fairly early in the war, and the enthusiasm, the determination of young Ukrainians, we will fight, we will not let our country deteriorate. Now, what's happening is that embassies, Ukrainian missions and embassies around the world are now stopping renewing or trying to get Ukrainians who are travelling overseas to go back. They're wanting visas not to be renewed in host countries. They're trying to get men who got out to get back in there to fight. And you can understand after 2.5 years, if you go off to the front line there, things are grim. And the Russians, on the other hand, Vladimir Putin doesn't care how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of Russians are killed. There's no accountability. He's just been re-elected miraculously for another term. So he is rock solid. Part of that solidity is his arrogance now. He's off to see China, Xi Jinping, the pictures we're seeing now to show that while Volodymyr Zelensky is cancelling trips out of Ukraine, won't leave the country because of this new emergency, Vladimir Putin is roaming the world with his great friend Xi Jinping.
And nobody negotiating any sort of ceasefire or pause.
That's right. I think the next move, if Donald Trump wins the US election in November, and at the moment the polling is indicating he will win, then he has said, I can solve the Ukrainian-Russia war within 24 hours, he said on CNN, whatever that means.
John, I will talk to you about Gaza in another hour on the ABC News channel, but for now, thank you. Interrupting, John, because I want to bring you some breaking news, and that is that the Snowtown murders accomplice, Mark Ray Hayden, has been released to live in the community with strict supervision, that after spending 25 years in jail. Hayden was an accessory to Australia's worst serial killings. The Department of Correctional Services says the 65-year-old was moved to a new address in the community on Thursday, Authorities say the new address has been very carefully vetted by SA Police, Community Corrections and the Parole Board. 11 people were murdered in the 1990s in what is known as the bodies in the barrels serial killings. Hayden was never convicted of murder, but was jailed for helping to hide and move the bodies, and he helped lease the disused bank vault in Snowtown where the barrels were found in May 1999. So that's the latest from that case. Now, the Australian Paralympic team uniform for the Paris Games has been launched at Australian Fashion Week in Sydney. ABC Sport's Elizabeth Wright has more.
The official uniform for the Paralympic team this year is really unique as they embrace accessible design, and this includes things such as magnetic clasps on jackets as well as zips on shoes and elastic waists on the trousers. And the athletes are really excited to be able to wear them at the opening ceremony, and I spoke to a number of athletes about how they're feeling.
It really, I guess, makes it seem real and instill that motivation to keep pushing forward. For myself, our Paralympic trials aren't until next month, so a couple of weeks away, which relatively is quite close to the actual games. So it can be really hard, I guess, you know, during the tough training to be like, why am I still doing this, putting myself through it? But when you can actually see it in person, it becomes that little bit more tangible.
It's really important. Like, I don't know how many times I've gotten ready for an opening ceremony with a bunch of other athletes, and we're just negotiating the uniforms and how to make it work, how to get the boot on, like things like that. So to be able to just come to the uniform and know that it's going to fit and that it's going to work it's both a relief, but also it feels like we're being respected for what we're there to do.
And today was also marking the fact that we're just over 100 days from the start of the Paralympic Games in Paris.
Let's catch up with all the sport now. Here's Daniela in Intili. Hi, Danny. New South Wales taking a 1-0 lead in the Women's State of Origin. It was a good match, wasn't it?
It was. It's an historic series because it's the first time the women are playing a 3-match series, and to win in Brisbane is pretty hard. But in front of a record crowd, Lorna, 25,000 were there. The Sky Blues winning 22-12. Jamie Chapman, you saw her scoring a terrific try. Well, there she is scoring a terrific try, and she also set one up. So now they've got the chance to wrap up the series in Newcastle in Game 2.
OK, the Gold Coast have thumped Geelong in Darwin. Tell us.
Yeah, huge upset. The Gold Coast love playing in Darwin. They seem to go really well. 64-point thumping Lorna. Jack Lou Cushis and Bailey Humphrey booting 5 goals each. So the score was 26-8, 164 to 15-10, 100. The highest score for the Suns, a 3rd straight loss for the second-placed Cats, who could slip out of the top 4.
What is the latest, Danny, in the golf today?
Well, the American Xander Schauffele, he has a 3-shot lead after the first round of the PGA Championship. An impressive opening round of 9 under par, bogey-free record 62, which is a equal course record. He also set a 62 last year at the US Open, but a really good way to start. Scotty Scheffler, 5 shots off the lead. He is the world #1.
Daniela Intili, thank you. A quick look at the national weather now. Brisbane, a shower or two. Sydney, a partly cloudy, a mostly sunny afternoon for Canberra. Melbourne, showers increasing. Showers over Hobart, mostly sunny for Adelaide, and sunny in Perth and Darwin. And that is the latest from ABC News for now. You can keep up to date anytime you want across all your devices. news.abc.net.au. Also the ABC iView service. I'm Lorna Dunkley. Thanks for your company.